Russia has now requested an urgent private meeting of the UN Security Council in the coming hours in response to the collapse of the Assad regime in Syria, a regime Russia has supported brutally over the last several years. It comes as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has ordered the country's military to take control of a buffer zone separating Israeli occupied areas from the rest of Syria. A source tells CNN that Russia has granted Syria's ousted President Bashar al Assad and his family asylum, citing humanitarian reasons.
And now for the breaking news from agencies. The former president of Syria, Bashar al-Assad, is in Moscow and has received asylum in Russia. This was reported by TASS with reference to the sources in the Kremlin. Assad and his family members arrived in Moscow, and Russia granted them asylum for humanitarian reasons, the sources said.
CNN's Fred Pleitkin is in Moscow with more from there.
Russia has granted former Syrian leader Bashar al-Assad and members of his family asylum, a Russian source tells CNN, and the Russians are saying that they are doing this on humanitarian grounds. The Russians, of course, for a very long time, were one of the main backers of the Assad regime, and it seems as though right now, as Assad has fallen, they have now allowed for him to come here to Moscow and stay here. This really came after a day on Sunday where the whereabouts of the former Syrian leader were very much unknown, very much in question. The rebels who entered Damascus said that he had fled, but it was unclear where he was, and it was actually the Russians who first confirmed that Assad had left power and that he had left the country as well. We are in front of what used to be the embassy of the Syrian Arab Republic here in Moscow. And as you can see, the flag up there that used to fly of the Syrian Arab Republic already has been taken down. If you pan to the door of the building, we can also see that there is no longer a plaque of the Syrian Arab Republic there either. The one thing that does remain, if we pan over to the other side, is a bust of Hafez al-Assad, who of course is the father of Bashar al-Assad, the Assad family ruling Syria, of course, for decades. The Russians, for their part, have said that they are talking to all of the armed groups who are on the ground in Syria. The Russians, of course, very concerned about their substantial military assets that they have inside Syria, a massive air base in Khmeimim, very close to Latakia, but then also a port in the Mediterranean, in the city of Tartus. The Russians, of course, recently conducting a naval exercise there. The Russians themselves also now very much in question what is going to happen to their military assets on the ground and whether those will need to be pulled back to Russia. For Pleitkin, CNN, Moscow.
I'm joined by Jill Doherty, a CNN contributor and adjunct professor at Georgetown University. Jill, thanks so much for taking time tonight.
Sure.
So first, I want to begin with what this means for Russian influence in Syria and the region. It invested enormous resources in money and troops on the ground there and participation, frankly, bloody participation in a bloody campaign by Assad against his own people. And now Assad is gone. What does it mean for Russia?
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of the property part of it, the bases, the air base and the naval base. But I think when you get into prestige and influence in the Middle East, I think that's where it really hurts because, let's go back to 2015 when Russia came in and launched a major air campaign to basically rescue Assad's regime. And they did it for a number of years. But now Russia, because one of the main reasons it's distracted with the war in Ukraine. And it was not able to stop these rebels from coming in and just taking over. And that's really significant. And then you have to look at the allies of Russia as well. Certainly Iran. Iran is looking much weaker too. So it's, does Russia still have the influence that it had in the Middle East? And can it do two things at once? Could it have contained this uprising or not? It certainly didn't, and it looks bad for Russia.
Yeah, it's notable that some of the veterans of that 2015 campaign, Russian veterans, commanders responsible for those attacks on civilians, went on to carry out quite similar tactics against civilians in Ukraine. what about the real estate, as you say, Jill? There, very key naval base for Russia. It's only one on the Mediterranean, but also an air base there. Is there any chance that it could negotiate its way to keep those bases under whatever form the new leadership of Syria takes?
Absolutely. I mean, that's the one thing that they're trying to do. And you can bet that they are negotiating furiously. There have been some reports from Moscow that the leaders of the rebels have guaranteed some type of access to the base or the safety of the bases. I think it's a little too early to really figure that out because even, you look at the Russian military bloggers who often take a much more realistic approach to things than the Kremlin. And they're saying not so fast. It doesn't appear that stable. Situation is tense, etc. So I think we have to wait. But those bases, as you pointed out, are very, very important. And I would say especially the naval base, it's kind of a repair and supply base and is very important for the Russian Navy. It also is very important for Russia's activities in many places, including Africa. So they definitely want to hold on to it.
And what of Assad himself now? Russian officials say, according to state news there, that he's been granted asylum. I must say, asylum is not something I would personally find valuable in a country such as Russia, given the way it treats many of its own people. But is Assad of any use to Vladimir Putin now?
That's a great way of putting it because I don't think he's of any use to Putin right now. I mean, the relationship really went back to the old Soviet days with Assad's father, long-standing, relationship that continued. But what can Assad do for Putin? I mean, basically nothing. It's kind of a pathetic thing now. He's in Moscow, but there's nothing really, I think, of interest for Putin. So Putin has to find some way of dealing with the new rulers or the people who control Syria at this point. And I do think that they are concerned about what comes next. Just the fact that this happens so quickly, I believe underscores the instability of these dictatorial regimes. And Putin, as we know, has been really paranoid about color revolutions and quick changes, etc. So I think there's probably a lot of serious thinking in Moscow. How did this happen? What does it mean?
No question, and I'm sure in Tehran as well. I mean, the brittleness of these regimes, evocative, certainly the fall of Saddam Hussein some 20 years ago, as we see those statues come down there across Syria. Jill Doherty, thanks so much as always.
Sure.